All the footage you are about to see in this episode was filmed tens, hundreds, sometimes thousands of meters below the surface of our planet. Few dare to venture here. When we think of the last places humans have barely touched, the parts of our planet that are still unknown, our thoughts almost instinctively turn to space or the great depths of the ocean. But there are less publicized regions that are just as mysterious. Because beneath the surface of the Earth, in some places, you can find buried worlds pierced with millions of tunnels and gigantic cavities, and whose maze of passageways, almost always hostile and of stunning beauty, forms labyrinths that can stretch for several hundred kilometers. Thus, many of these underground kingdoms hidden beneath mountains, deserts, or jungles are so vast that we have only explored a tiny part of them. Others are still waiting to be discovered and are pure terra incognita. These fascinating worlds remain mostly unexplored because machines can't access them and they reveal their secrets slowly, to those who dare to venture into the depths of these places isolated from the surface by climbing up. Expeditions that sometimes require spending several days in tunnels, often barely wider than a coffin and overhung by hundreds of meters of rock. And today, we're going to explore these territories that have never known sunlight. Where we'll begin our adventure with the question, do we even have an idea of the extent of our ignorance, of the vastness of the underground networks that still remain to be discovered and explored? Surprisingly, it's possible to answer this question by looking at the amount of underground tunnels and the number of caves that have been found per square kilometer. In the regions that have been most thoroughly explored, mainly in Europe and the United States, we are able to estimate the extent of this ignorance, and it is absolutely staggering. The verdict, surprisingly, is as follows. It is estimated that barely 10% of the caves and underground networks on our planet have been found, and of those 10%, the vast majority have not yet been fully explored. Many of the most impressive underground networks have branches where speleologists have stopped, encountering shafts that are too deep, siphons too long, or openings too narrow or risky. Thus, even the most optimistic estimates consider that less than 1% of existing underground worlds have been fully explored. The untouched 90% remain pure terra incognita. To date, on a global scale, about 10,000 kilometers of galleries spread over 3,000 major systems have been documented. It is estimated that there must exist at least this amount. Millions of additional kilometers of tunnels containing around 50 million caves, chasms, and cavities that have never been explored. Mapping these vast territories depends entirely on a community of just a few thousand women and men, passionate and experienced enough to embark on exploration expeditions, which are often complex to carry out in order to enter these underground realms. The beginning of the story is always the same. You have to find the entryways. Sometimes they're so large they're impossible to miss, and temples have even been built inside them. Most of the time, these openings are just holes in the surface. Simple holes behind which sometimes hide a network of winding tunnels of staggering proportions, which can lead to truly mind-blowing discoveries. The maps you are looking at are of the parts explored so far of the two deepest underground networks in the world. The Verjovkina and Krubera systems, both located in Georgia, in the mountain range of the Western Caucasus. At first glance, these entrances seem unremarkable and reveal nothing of the vast underground networks they access, and they plunge vertically into the mountains for nearly 2,200 meters. To reach the bottom of these systems, an experienced caver needs several days of expedition, during which he must cross dizzying shafts, underground lakes, and passages of inhuman narrowness. Underground systems range from small caves just a few dozen cubic meters in size to massive ones large enough to fit a hot air balloon. They owe absolutely nothing to chance. They were patiently created without hammer or chisel by the greatest sculptor of the depths, water, which, by seeping through the cracks, armed with time and the magic of chemistry, manages to overcome the rock, hollowing out the stone and turning it into Swiss cheese. So, while architects build a cathedral in a few decades, water sculpts underground structures just as vast over thousands of years. Not all types of rocks are sensitive to its flow. Some, which are chemically very stable, resist, but limestone, gypsum, or dolomite are literally eaten away by the flow. These rocks erode from rainwater because, as water moves through the atmosphere and soil, it picks up carbon dioxide too, which, when reacting with water, forms small amounts of carbonic acid, a slightly aggressive substance. Thus, in mountain ranges made up of sedimentary limestone rocks, formed by the accumulation over millions of years of fossilized marine organism shells, the slightly acidic rainwater continuously attacks the stones over long periods of time, molecule by molecule, drop by drop. This incredible ability to dissolve calcium carbonate, boosted by geological patience, widens the cracks by patiently carving, over millennia and with acidity, shafts, conduits, galleries and cavities that together form astonishing landscapes hidden beneath the mountain ranges that the water passes through. Beneath the impressive Karst mountains located in the Chinese region of Guilin, this ability of water to eat away at the rock has given rise to sprawling underground networks that stretch over nearly 2,400 square kilometers and have only begun to be explored very recently. To give you an idea of this ability of water to erode rocks, consider that a limestone wall, continuously in contact with running water, gradually thins by a millimeter as it is constantly licked by acidity. In just a few years, or a few decades on average. Think about that the next time you walk through a limestone reef, every time you see a river on the surface. A polished bed reveals what water's relentless force has sculpted over thousands of years. A thin stream of water seeping into the ground through fractures. In a few 100,000 years, a tiny opening just a few millimeters wide can become an abyss with no visible bottom. And that's why the vast majority of caves on Earth are found in so-called karst regions, which means they're made up of rocks that are attacked by water. If you aim to discover a new network, it's in these regions with perforated subsoil, which you see marked in red on the map, that you should focus your search. And since these regions cover about 20% of the planet's land surface, that gives speleologists a potentially gigantic playground. Especially since many regions of the world, such as Central Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, or Papua New Guinea, have hardly been explored at all. To get an idea of the wonders that are surely hidden beneath their surface, it's best to look at those that have already been found elsewhere in the world. Within certain underground networks, there are sometimes chambers with truly colossal volumes. In Malaysia, the Gunung Mulu limestone plateau's underground resembles Swiss cheese, where discoveries have occurred. The Sarawak chamber, which is 600 meters long, 400 meters wide, and 80 meters high, is so vast that it could fit 40 football fields inside. In Vietnam, the Sandun system is home to the largest cave currently known in the world, with its ceiling located 200 meters above the ground. It would literally be possible to fit a 60-story skyscraper inside. Within karst regions, water that seeps deep underground can even give rise to underground rivers that flow and wind through the Earth's interior, sometimes for dozens of kilometers beneath the surface before emerging again. To map these invisible networks, whose paths are often extremely difficult to follow, hydrogeologists sometimes use fluorescent tracers, whose non-toxic dyes make it possible to see where these mysterious waters eventually emerge. Exceptionally, the points where groundwater emerges can even be gigantic in France, such as at the Fontaine de Vaucluse, where the water gushes out after making its way through. A path through the darkness of an underground network of nearly 1,000 square kilometers rises back to the light through a conduit almost 300 meters deep, which can reach a flow rate of 90 cubic meters per second during flood periods, enough to fill an Olympic swimming pool every 30 seconds. Underground, water doesn't just flow and carve. It also builds structures of almost unreal delicacy, because what water takes from the rock, it can deposit farther along. When a drop of water loaded with dissolved calcium falls from the ceiling of a cave, it releases a bit of carbon dioxide into the air, which then causes the precipitation of the calcium carbonate it contains. Over time, these accumulated deposits form stalactites on the ceiling and stalagmites on the ground. The growth rate of these rock formations depends on the nature of the water flowing over them, and it usually takes several millennia to form a stalagmite 1 meter high. But in the most extreme cases, inside caves located in tropical regions where the rainwater is heavily loaded with limestone. Some can grow 1 centimeter a year or 1 meter a century. In Lozère, nearly 100 meters underground, there is, in the Avant Armand cave, a chamber nicknamed the Petrified Forest, where more than 400 stalagmites have grown. It is believed that one of these columns, nearly 30 meters high, took about 300,000 years of dripping to form. In caves all around the world, the flow of water, which deposits minerals as it follows the curves of the walls, can sometimes create rocks or crystals with eccentric shapes that seem to defy gravity. And these have been named draperies, organs, gauze, or even macaronis. The volume of some underground networks that have been discovered is so vast that they are entire kingdoms in their own right. Kingdoms often only partially explored, with galleries that stretch far beyond the limits of our maps. At present, the king of underground labyrinths is undoubtedly the Mammoth Cave network. Located in Kentucky, United States, it features over 680 kilometers of interconnected galleries. But all these winding tunnels, which are very diverse and can be dry, wet, huge or narrow, pristine or dusty, are only the part that has been mapped so far of a network that is certainly much larger. Every year, expeditions discover new branches in this system, which is already 2.5 times larger than the entire Paris subway network. Yet, as impressive as it is, we are fairly certain that the Mammoth Cave system is not the largest in the world. In Oaxaca, Mexico, there's a hard-to-access network of galleries with a bottom no one has reached, and water from it takes a long time to emerge from the mountain. And it emerges so far away that we believe there is an unexplored network in these mountains of enormous size, which must surpass in scale everything we know, even though a large part of it is probably flooded by water. Some of the largest known cave systems are even completely submerged. Formed during the last ice age, at a time when sea levels were 120 meters lower than they are today, the underground networks of Yucatan in Mexico have since been taken over by water. So, to explore them, you need to use scuba tanks. Some aquatic caves are stunningly beautiful, and I was lucky to explore them. Between the stalactites and stalagmites that formed in the open air more than 10,000 years ago, they are part of the Sac-Actun system, which forms a submerged labyrinth of more than 350 kilometers of tunnels. This makes it the world's largest known underwater cave system. A system so vast, it remains far from revealing all its secrets. Water flows downhill due to gravity, which is why most discovered cavities are in elevated areas. Because when you are on a plain or near the shore, as you go deeper underground, you quickly encounter groundwater, seawater, or underground rivers. While the presence of water greatly complicates access to certain networks, there are even some that are completely inaccessible, simply because they have no entry points. in some regions rich in limestone, such as the Yunnan Plateau in southern China or in the Balkans. The analysis of seismic waves, which allows us to perform a kind of ultrasound of the inside of our planet. Because they propagate differently through various materials, it's now possible to detect underground networks below the surface, but without any known opening leading to them. But don't go imagining that deep within our planet there are vast numbers of gigantic chambers or bubbles of empty space under the mountains. Because all the isolated networks discovered through seismic waves are only a few hundred meters below the surface, which is relatively shallow compared to the diameter of our planet. Going too deep inside the Earth, the mechanical stress of the rocks and the difficulty for water to circulate there in large quantities prevent the formation of gigantic cavities. In any case, these networks, narrow and sealed by the stacking of rock layers, will probably remain inaccessible forever. To reach them, we must drill beneath their fascinating beauty, which alone inspires exploration. All these hard-to-reach environments are of great interest to scientists, as they serve as natural libraries that can preserve the records of vanished worlds. In these mineral cavities, sheltered from surface hardships, everything is preserved for a long time. So by analyzing the calcite deposits that form the stalactites and stalagmites and that cover the walls of the caves, we are sometimes able to reconstruct the history of climate evolution going back thousands or even hundreds of thousands of years. The carbon and oxygen atoms form the carbonate deposited in these formations by each drop of water passing through them. They inform us about rainfall patterns and past droughts that have affected the surface. In the networks where air manages to rush in, we sometimes even find, preserved in the layers of soil, pollen spores and even particles, markers of extreme events such as gigantic fires or volcanic eruptions. Stalagmite analysis in China has enabled reconstruction of 1,800 years of monsoon cycles, and to highlight their links with the collapse of several imperial dynasties. And then, of course, there's the quest for the Holy Grail. The discoveries of caves that were once inhabited, which served as natural shelters for bears, wolves, and especially humans, and in which we can find fossils and sometimes even, exceptionally, tools and cave paintings that help us better understand where we come from. Most of the most fabulous decorated caves discovered so far, such as the Chauvet Cave or Lascaux, are relatively easy to access. Forgotten and hidden by vegetation or by landslides, the cave paintings that cover their walls have remained protected from surface weather, reaching us almost intact. Sometimes, tens of thousands of years after they were drawn, they have often been found just a short distance from inhabited places and quite by chance. But there are some whose visit requires a strong heart. This is true for the underwater cave of Cosquera, which has likely been undisturbed for about 18,500 years, before being rediscovered in the mid-1980s in the Calanques Massif. To access this cave, you have to dive down to a depth of 37 meters before venturing into a narrow passage 175 meters long, which leads to a partially submerged chamber that was inhabited by our ancestors during the last ice age, at a time when the sea level was 120 meters lower than it is today. Despite the extremely hostile conditions in underground networks, some strange creatures have adapted. In the damp, lightless austerity of these worlds of darkness, where the temperature remains surprisingly stable all year round, natural selection has brought forth improbable metabolisms and biological marvels. Thus, we find them in the bodies of water that have formed deep within the earth. Fish that have given up vision, whose eyes, having become useless, eventually receded and then disappeared. In these lightless environments, you can even sometimes come across translucent insects and albino salamanders, such as proteangards, which feed by filtering the rare old organic particles, sometimes several years old, that they manage to find in the stagnant water. Like all the creatures living here, the Prote have adapted to live frugally, endowed with a lifespan that has been estimated at nearly a century. These organisms have mastered the art of slowing down their metabolism, and when food becomes scarce, they can remain motionless for years. Experiments show they can survive almost a decade without eating. But personally, what never ceases to amaze me the most about these cave empires is the very fact that some humans are passionate or daring enough to venture into them. Because when you think about it, for many of us, at first glance, willingly going down into a dark, damp, narrow hole with no guarantee of coming back alive seems reckless on second thought. So, what is it that drives speleologists to devote their weekends, vacations, and sometimes even their lives to organizing expeditions that, even when modest, have to be planned with military-like logistics to maximize their chances of success, so they don't run out of light or get lost in a maze of labyrinthine tunnels, or worse, become a victim of a flash flood from storms, which in just a few minutes can turn a dry tunnel into a black torrent, blocking the way out and washing away the markers. Certainly, it's not for fame. Caving is a small world of insiders, with almost no audience or podium. Some will tell you that they go down for the pleasure of entering a world apart and witnessing mesmerizing sights that exist nowhere else on Earth. To explore forgotten temples, mineral cathedrals built away from the world by millennia of flowing water, and whose silence allows you to learn to listen and observe with greater acuity. Others will tell you that these inverted worlds are realms of wonder into which they venture, for the fleeting pleasure of finding themselves in magical places that only see the light when people enter them, and for the pleasure of knowing that after they leave, silence and darkness will return. For weeks, months, years, until someone is brave enough to come back here. Others, often the most seasoned cavers and exploration enthusiasts, will tell you that they venture into these tunnels, helmets strapped on and ropes in hand, because they love the idea of pushing the horizon without knowing when they'll stop. It's less about glory and more about mapping. And the thrill of exploring unknown places with twists and turns unseen by anyone before them. At a time when the surface of our world has been photographed, mapped, explored, and observed from every angle, they are living an adventure with no signal and no global positioning system. They advance in areas where they're first to walk or squeeze through. Through their underground expeditions, they eliminate the last unknown areas, the terra incognita. Finally, some, with a more spiritual approach, will even tell you that diving into the heart of these inverted mountains, whose walls gradually close in on you, as you go deeper inside, it allows you to somewhat touch the world from the inside and to strip away. By going deep inside, here, in this world without news or network, we let the ego fall away. Crawling and sneaking teach humility, offering a way to withdraw, escape the world and see it differently. For this, going underground is a bit like going deep inside yourself. You enter a world of isolation and loss of bearings, a world without day or night, where the sense of time passing, unlike on the surface, fades away. And even if, when coming back up, you're a bit muddy and tired, you also feel slightly more alive. We descend deep underground, enter a confined space, and emerge energized, driven by the desire to return. Whatever the explanation, caving is a madness as gentle as it is precious, practiced by those who marvel. Instead of looking at the sky, they plunge their eyes into the abyss of a hidden world that only asks to be explored, sometimes just meters beneath our feet.